Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Stick to the Script. I'm your host, Joshua Perales, and today we're gonna dive into the movie Supergirl that was just released recently. So, buckle up as we get into a deep discussion about the nature of this film. Some people might have an issue for Supergirl being supposedly quote unquote Superman, but drunk and depressed. However, I think that's the biggest strength of this movie and about this character, specifically in this movie. There has been approximately one Supergirl movie before this, starred Helen Slater, and it was back in the 80s. Now, traditionally, Supergirl has been painted as kind of as being very similar to Superman in a lot of ways, sometimes even bordering on just straight up being Superman but a girl. However, this movie is based on a comic book that came out in a much more recent timeline, a modern comic called Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. That book drastically shifted up her whole vibe and rewrote her origin story in certain ways so that she was more distinct. It gave her a mission of her own to take on another planet besides Earth. And in a lot of ways, it made her more jaded than she's ever been. Now, I always say when it comes to character work, the lower they start, the higher they'll go toward the end of the story when they dig themselves out of their hole. It's just really entertaining to watch someone overcome immense odds and grow into the best version of themselves in spite of those odds. And that's exactly the type of story that we get here with Supergirl. Now, this movie bombed at the box office. It didn't get nearly the amount of draw as its cousin Superman did last summer. There wasn't really a positive word of mouth either because most people didn't really like the movie. Common complaints were that the plot was weak, the narrative was weak, that the characters besides Supergirl were poorly written. And while I can agree to some extent with that, because I do think that the movie is carried by Millie Alcock's performance as Supergirl, I don't think any of these things are necessarily a fair assessment of this movie, which is a lot more complex and a lot better than a lot of people are giving it credit for. Essentially, this movie is about Kara Zor-El, who is the cousin of the famous Superman. Everyone knows him, but not as many people know her story. Whereas Superman was sent away from Krypton to Earth as a baby, she was already a teenager when Krypton was exploding. And although the reason differs in versions of her that appear throughout different media, this one says that there was a disease going around in the last remnant of Krypton that her parents sent her away because she was the only person who didn't have it. And she was going to be able to still have a life more than anyone else on the little area of the planet that still existed. When she got to Earth, she didn't even know how to speak anything other than the Kryptonian language. She had to adjust. Ultimately, she ended up going back into space to just have her own solo adventures. Now, what's really interesting about this is in the DC Comics lore, there are several weaknesses that Superman has, more than just the kryptonite that everyone knows. His second biggest one is that whereas he gets his powers from a yellow sun, he actually gets weaker and loses them in the presence of a red sun. Now, the movie makes use of this fact by having Kara go off-world to planets with red suns so that she can feel the effects of alcohol and spend her days drunk wandering the cosmos with just her and her dog. Now, this is something that, as a comic book reader, I would have never even fathomed could since the red sun has always been presented as just a weakness, it's something that Superman and Kryptonians need to avoid. Having it twist around like this, I feel like was a brilliant piece of character work because normally Superman is too worried about keeping his senses, at the top of their game so he can deal with villains. But here, Kara doesn't even qualify as a hero at the beginning of the movie. She does some nice things like helping out a girl who's being harassed at the bar, but she's not a hero. She's spending her days wasting away in a way that's a lot less ideal than most heroes are painted in big Hollywood films. I think the film was really brave for adapting that really rough around the edges side of her from the comics. The movie ends up following, plot-wise, a young girl that had her family murdered by a space villain. This girl tracks the villain down and enlists the help of Kara since she displays show of strength. Kara ends up helping her because this same villain, as she's talking to the girl, poisons her dog and steals her ship. So she ends up having to go on a quest to get the antidote to save her dog. Now, throughout the course of this movie, we learn a lot about grief and how different people deal with it because both Kara and this young girl have lost their family. Although Kara being older and the cousin of Superman and coming from a really good family of parents that cared about her and other people, she understands that grief needs to be handled delicately and it can't be taken out on those around you. She also learns that the way she's been processing her grief has been very self-destructive as she's simply been running from it, not facing it at all. So as she goes along on this journey of finding the antidote for her dog, she is able to mentor this young girl and prevent her from killing the villain that killed her family out of revenge, sparing her a lifetime of regret. Interestingly enough, though, as well, most superhero movies would have that be that. The villain be spared and sent off to jail, and a lesson learned. But in this movie, as soon as the young girl leaves the area, Kara convinces her that it's not worth it. Kara's the one that kills the villain. I think that was a very nice character wrinkle to add, a little bit flipping the traditional superhero tropes on their head, giving her an extra dimension that most heroes don't have. And as the journey is complete, and Kara has used her own self-reflection. Sometimes when you're alone for a long period of time, even literally just talking to someone and having someone to listen to your thoughts, not even having them give feedback, sometimes even that is enough to cause some serious self-reflection and help you see things in a new light. That's exactly what this young girl was for Kara. It especially helped that she was kind of a mirror image of her, lost, alone, depressed, grief-stricken. And Kara, ultimately, she is a hero, and she proves that by making sure that this girl doesn't fall into the same path that she did. And at the end of the movie, Kara also has a renewed faith in life and wanting to chase happiness and heal. The more I think about this movie, the more I really like it, because upon seeing it, I liked it, and upon talking about it even more, I remember more and more things about why I liked it, because the character work was just fantastic, and something that is not always seen in superhero movies or other forms of media. In this episode, we talked all about the character work of Supergirl, and why, since it was very expertly executed, it doesn't deserve the bad rap that it's getting. And we talked about how it's nice to go against the grain of established norms of the genre, and how going deep into what makes characters miserable at the beginning of their story and giving a character a lot to overcome can be very effective at engaging audiences with the journey. that will be all for today's episode, folks. Thank you for joining me as we talked about one of my favorite movies of the summer thus far. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about a movie that hasn't come out this year, but nonetheless is one of the best movies I've ever seen and has some of the best character work, Whiplash, starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. But for today, I appreciate you coming and hanging out with me and discussing one of the movies of the summer that should have been considered a blockbuster and still is in my opinion. I'm your host, Joshua Peralez, and all of y'all have a good night.